Our history books are filled with confident answers, but the past is far more mysterious. What if the stories we accept as fact are merely the tip of the iceberg, concealing truths that defy our understanding? We are about to embark on a journey through 50 of the wildest historical theories that challenge everything we think we know. These are not just fanciful tales, but compelling ideas with shreds of evidence that suggest they might, against all odds, be true. You will discover a world where ancient civilizations possessed impossible technology, where legendary cities might be real, and where some of history's greatest enigmas could finally have an explanation. What secrets lie buried with the Sphinx, and could a simple clay jar rewrite the story of human invention? Are you ready to question the narrative you were taught? The story begins not with an archaeologist's shovel, but with the words of the ancient philosopher Plato. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 B.C., he describes a powerful and sophisticated empire called Atlantis. He paints a picture of a circular city with concentric rings of water and land, boasting advanced engineering, vast resources, and a formidable military. This great civilization, he claims, became arrogant and attempted to conquer the ancient world, only to be defeated by the Athenians. But the true end came from the gods, who, displeased by the Atlanteans' hubris, caused the entire island to be swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Plato presents this tale as a true history passed down through generations. So, was he recording a factual account of a real cataclysm, or was Atlantis merely a philosophical allegory about the dangers of imperial overreach? The debate has raged for centuries. One of the most compelling proposed locations lies in the Mediterranean. The island of Santorini, known in ancient times as Thera, was once the center of the vibrant Minoan civilization. Around the year 1600 B.C., a volcanic eruption of almost unimaginable force tore the island apart, creating the massive caldera we see today and generating tsunamis that would have devastated coastal settlements for miles. Could this catastrophic event be the historical core of Plato's story, a memory of an advanced culture vanishing in a geological instant? Others look to a far more mysterious structure, visible only from high above. In the vast desert of Mauritania lies the Richat structure, often called the Eye of the Sahara. This natural geological formation is a series of concentric rings that bears a stunning resemblance to Plato's description of Atlantis's capital city. Proponents point to its location, which they argue matches ancient descriptions of being beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and to satellite imagery that suggests it was once surrounded by water. They cite evidence of ancient riverbeds and artifacts found in the region as potential proof of a lost civilization. From the Azores to the Caribbean, the search for Atlantis continues, driven by a tantalizing possibility that one of our oldest stories might just be our most enduring historical truth. That same sense of a lost, deeper history surrounds one of the world's most iconic monuments. Gazing out from the Giza Plateau, the Great Sphinx presents a face we all recognize, yet its true story might be a complete mystery. Mainstream Egyptology attributes its construction to the pharaoh Khafre around 2500 B.C., during the Dry Old Kingdom period. But what if the stone itself tells a different story, one written not by the winds of a desert, but by the torrential rains of a forgotten age? This is the core of a radical theory that challenges the very timeline of human civilization. Geologist Robert Schoch brought a scientific eye to the enigma, examining not the art or the inscriptions, but the actual rock of the Sphinx enclosure. He identified weathering patterns that he argues are unmistakable, deep, vertical fissures and undulating, scooped-out profiles. This type of erosion, he insists, is not the work of sand and wind, which scours and abrades surfaces horizontally. Instead, it is the classic signature of water, specifically heavy and prolonged rainfall, cascading down the limestone walls over thousands of years. The problem is profound. The last time the Giza region experienced a climate wet enough to produce such rainfall ended around the end of the last ice age, a staggering 10,000 years ago. If Scott's interpretation is correct, the Sphinx could be more than twice as old as we are taught, a relic from a pre-pharaonic epoch whose builders remain completely unknown. This water erosion hypothesis is fiercely contested, of course, with many geologists attributing the weathering to other processes like rising groundwater or the effects of salt crystallization. Yet the idea persists, forcing us to wonder if the Sphinx is a lone, weathered sentinel from a time before recorded history, guarding secrets from an age lost to the great amnesia of humankind. The Sphinx is not the only ancient monument that seems to whisper of forgotten knowledge. Deep within the Temple of Hathor at Dendera in Egypt, a series of intricate stone carvings adorn the crypt walls. To the modern eye, these reliefs are startling. They show what appear to be massive, elongated bulbs, each containing a snake-like filament winding its way from one end to the other. These objects are held aloft by figures, with what looks like a cable running from the base of the bulb to a box that some interpret as a power source. Could this be a literal depiction of an electric light bulb, a technology we believe was invented thousands of years later? Mainstream Egyptology offers a different interpretation, identifying the scene as a symbolic representation of a creation myth. The snake, they argue, represents the god Harsomptus emerging from a lotus flower, which is itself sprouting from the primordial waters symbolized by the Djed pillar, a symbol of stability. The entire tableau is a spiritual allegory, not an electrical diagram. Yet, the visual similarity is so uncanny that the theory persists. If the ancient Egyptians did possess such technology, it could explain the absence of soot marks in the deep, intricate tombs of the Valley of the Kings, places where torches would have blackened the ceilings with residue. This idea finds a strange, potential partner in an artifact discovered far from Egypt. In the 1930s, during excavations near Baghdad, workers uncovered a simple, unassuming clay jar. Inside this jar, dated to the Parthian period around 2,000 years ago, was a copper cylinder housing an iron rod. When the curator of the Iraqi National Museum, Wilhelm Koenig, examined it, he proposed a revolutionary idea. If the jar had been filled with an acidic electrolyte like vinegar or wine, it would have functioned as a simple galvanic cell, capable of producing a small electric current. The so-called Baghdad battery could have generated about 1 volt of electricity, but for what purpose? Skeptics argue that there is no evidence the jar was ever used this way, and that similar containers have been found holding sacred scrolls, suggesting a purely religious function. Proponents, however, speculate on a range of uses, from electroplating gold onto objects to medical therapies, a subtle form of power lost with the civilization that may have understood it. The evidence is circumstantial, a collection of intriguing but disconnected clues. Yet together, the Dendera reliefs and the Baghdad battery present a tantalizing puzzle, forcing us to ask whether the spark of invention was discovered, lost, and then rediscovered in the long, dark night of history. Locked away in a vault at Yale University is a book that has defied understanding for centuries. The Voynich Manuscript is a small, densely packed volume of about 240 vellum pages, filled from edge to edge with a handwritten script that no one on Earth can read. Its characters flow in a seemingly consistent and structured way, suggesting a real language with grammar and syntax, yet they correspond to no known alphabet. This is not its only mystery. The pages are illustrated with stunning, perplexing images, plants that do not resemble any known species, intricate astronomical charts featuring unknown constellations, and countless drawings of tiny, naked women bathing in or connected by a complex network of green, fluid-filled tubes. For decades, the leading theory was that it was an elaborate Renaissance-era hoax, a meaningless text created to dupe a wealthy patron, but then science intervened. Radiocarbon dating performed in 2009 confirmed the vellum was created between 1404 and 1438. The book is genuinely medieval, a real artifact from the early 15th century, which makes the hoax theory far less likely. Why would someone go to the immense expense of preparing parchment and meticulously writing a nonsense book of over 30,000 words, complete with detailed, bizarre art for a fraud? The dedication required seems to argue for a genuine, purposeful creation. Modern cryptographers, including teams of codebreakers from both world wars and advanced computer algorithms, have thrown their might against the manuscript's code. They have applied every tool of linguistic analysis, searching for patterns that would reveal a cipher. Yet, the Voynich script stubbornly resists, its internal structure just coherent enough to feel like language but too alien to crack. This relentless failure has given rise to other compelling theories. Perhaps it is written in a proto-language, a constructed script for a tongue that died out before it could be recorded elsewhere. Maybe it is a highly specialized cipher protecting valuable, perhaps alchemical or herbal, knowledge that its author dared not write plainly. The very real possibility remains that we are holding a complete, untranslated book of knowledge, its secrets perfectly preserved, waiting for the one key that will finally unlock its silent, botanical world. The silent, botanical world of the Voynich Manuscript represents a knowledge we cannot access, but from the depths of the sea, a different kind of relic emerged, one that speaks a language of gears and mathematics we are only just beginning to understand. In the year 1900, sponge divers exploring a Roman-era shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera stumbled upon a lump of corroded bronze and wood, initially dismissed as a piece of nautical debris. It was only years later, when the crust broke apart, that the true marvel was revealed. Inside was a complex clockwork assembly of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, precisely cut and mounted within a wooden frame. This was the Antikythera Mechanism, and it was utterly alone. Nothing of its kind, with such intricate mechanical sophistication, would appear again in the historical record for more than 1,000 years. This was not a simple timekeeper. Researchers, using advanced imaging techniques like 3D X-rays, have painstakingly reconstructed its functions. They revealed a device of breathtaking genius, an ancient analog computer. By turning a hand crank, the user could calculate the movements of the sun and moon, predict lunar and solar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, and even track the cycles of the Olympic Games. It modeled the irregular orbit of the moon, a complexity that required a sophisticated differential gear, a technology once thought to have been invented in the 16th century. Its purpose was celestial divination, a window into the mechanics of the heavens. The mainstream view credits its creation to the brilliant Greek scientists of the Hellenistic period, a time of extraordinary innovation in Alexandria. Yet its existence is such a profound outlier that it fuels a powerful theory. Could this mechanism be a lone survivor, a single relic from a strand of technological advancement that was almost entirely lost? Its complexity suggests it was not the first of its kind, but perhaps the last, a product of a scientific tradition whose other works were melted down for scrap or lay undiscovered at the bottom of the sea. The Antikythera Mechanism forces a humbling realization. The march of progress is not always a straight line. It can be a cycle of brilliance, catastrophe, and forgetting, where a single, salvaged artifact can hint at an entire age of knowledge that vanished beneath the waves of time. The gears of the Antikythera Mechanism reveal a world capable of genius, yet its story was lost for a millennium. On the misty shores of Britain, another legend whispers from the same kind of historical silence, a story so powerful it has defined our idea of chivalry for centuries. The tale of King Arthur, his knights, and the Round Table is a cornerstone of folklore, but could it be rooted in a real historical figure? Separating the man from the myth is a task that leads us into the fragmentary records of post-Roman Britain, a time often called the Dark Ages for its profound lack of written history. As the Roman legions withdrew in the early 5th century, the island was left vulnerable, fractured into warring kingdoms and facing relentless invasion by the Saxons. It is in this chaotic twilight that the first faint mentions of a leader named Arthur appear. A Welsh monk named Nennius, writing around the year 800, compiled a history of his people. In it, he lists 12 battles fought by a Dux Bellorum, a war leader named Arthur, who led the Britons to victory against the Saxons. The most famous of these was the Battle of Badon Hill, a resounding triumph that supposedly halted the Saxon advance for a generation. An even earlier source, the monk Gildas, writing in the 6th century, mentions the Battle of Badon, but frustratingly, he never names the victorious British commander. This single omission is a chasm in history, leaving us to wonder if the unnamed hero was the man later generations would call Arthur. The search for the historical Arthur then turns from crumbling manuscripts to the earth itself, to the quest for his legendary court Camelot. Was it a real place? Archaeologists and historians have long debated the potential candidates. Tintagel Castle in Cornwall, a dramatic fortress perched on a windswept headland, is steeped in Arthurian lore as his supposed birthplace. Excavations there have uncovered the remains of a high-status settlement from precisely the right period, the 5th and 6th centuries, with luxury goods from as far away as the Mediterranean, proving it was a seat of powerful Celtic rulers. Another strong contender is Cadbury Hill in Somerset. Locals have called this massive Iron Age hill Fort Camelot for centuries. When archaeologists dug into its ramparts, they found evidence that the ancient defenses were massively reinforced and a great hall was constructed in the post-Roman era, exactly when a war leader like Arthur would have needed a secure stronghold. These sites do not yield a stone with Arthur's name carved upon it, but they paint a picture of a Britain with powerful, organized rulers capable of leading the resistance described in the fragmentary text. The man may have been a composite of several such leaders, his deeds magnified over centuries of storytelling into the legend we know today. The truth is buried deep, not just under the soil of Britain, but under the immense weight of the myth itself, a ghost of a king waiting in the mist for his story to be told. From the mists of British legend, we journey to the dense jungles of the Americas, where another artifact promised a direct line to lost wisdom. The crystal skulls emerged from obscurity in the 19th century, captivating explorers and mystics with their perfect, haunting forms. Carved from single, massive blocks of clear or milky quartz, these objects were said to be ancient Mesoamerican relics, created by the Maya or the Aztecs with techniques that modern artisans could not replicate. The most famous of all is the Mitchell-Hedges skull, named for the adventurer F.A. Mitchell-Hedges, who claimed his daughter Anna discovered it in 1924 beneath a collapsed altar in a Maya city in Belize. Its story was perfect. It was said to be impossibly old, featuring a detachable jawbone carved from the same flawless piece of crystal, and so perfectly polished that it seemed to defy the technology of any ancient civilization. Legends swirled around these objects. Some claimed they were repositories of Atlantean knowledge, that when brought together, the skulls would reveal profound secrets about humanity's past and future. Others believed they possessed healing properties or could amplify psychic energy, making them powerful talismans from a forgotten age. This romanticized vision was fueled by their sheer beauty and the aura of mystery that surrounded their origins. They felt ancient, and their connection to sophisticated pre-Columbian cultures gave the legend a powerful foothold. Then came the tools of modern science, which subjected the skulls to a level of scrutiny their creators never anticipated. In 2008, a team from the British Museum and the Smithsonian Institution conducted a detailed analysis of their most famous crystal skulls, including the Mitchell-Hedges specimen. Using powerful electron microscopes, they searched for the microscopic traces left behind by the tools used to carve them. What they found was unequivocal. The surfaces of the skulls showed the clear, rotary marks of jewelers' wheels and lapidary drills, technology that was only developed in 19th century Europe. The quartz itself, once thought to be of Mesoamerican origin, was traced to sources in Brazil and Madagascar, regions with no known trade links to the ancient Maya. The evidence pointed to a much more recent and less mystical origin. These magnificent objects were almost certainly crafted in the 1800s, likely in workshops in Germany or France, to feed a growing European fascination with the exotic and the occult. They were beautiful fakes, but their story reveals a deeper truth about our own desire to believe. We long for tangible connections to lost worlds, so much so that we can sometimes gift the mundane with the power of the miraculous. The crystal skulls are not portals to Atlantis, but they are mirrors, reflecting our endless fascination with the secrets we wish the past held. High on the barren plateaus of southern Peru, the desert floor holds a secret written on a truly monumental scale. Stretching for miles across the arid pampas are the Nazca Lines, hundreds of giant geoglyphs depicting spiders, monkeys, hummingbirds, and geometric shapes so vast they can only be fully appreciated from the sky. Their sheer size and precision, created over 1,000 years ago by the Nazca people, have fueled endless speculation. How could an ancient culture design and execute such immense artwork without the ability to fly? In the 1960s, author Erich von Däniken proposed a wildly popular answer. He argued that these lines were not art for human eyes, but landing strips and navigation markers for ancient astronauts, extraterrestrial visitors whose spacecraft needed long, flat runways to touch down on Earth. The theory captured the public imagination, suggesting the figures were signals to the gods in their chariots, a literal welcome mat for alien pilots. It is a dramatic solution to the mystery, but is it the correct one? Mainstream archaeology offers a far more grounded, yet equally fascinating, explanation rooted in the world of the Nazca themselves. These people inhabited one of the driest places on Earth, where water was the ultimate source of life and power. Researchers proposed that the lines were not meant for the sky, but for the Earth, serving as sacred pathways for religious processions. By walking these lines, priests or pilgrims could have been appealing to deities associated with water and fertility. The animal figures are not random. Many of them are creatures linked to water in local mythology. The monkey, for instance, comes from the lush, rain-drenched Amazon forests to the east, a symbol of the life-giving water the Nazca desperately needed. Furthermore, the placement of many lines corresponds with astronomical events, like the solstice sun or the rising of certain stars that marked the coming of the rainy season. They functioned as a colossal calendar, aligning the celestial cycles with the vital need for water on the ground. The method of their creation supports this earthly purpose. The Nazca simply removed the dark, sun-baked stones from the surface, exposing the lighter, sandy soil beneath. This technique, while laborious, did not require advanced technology, only careful planning and communal effort. They could have used simple grids and scaling techniques to enlarge small designs onto the vast desert canvas. The mystery of the Nazca Lines, then, may not be a question of alien technology, but of human spirituality. They are a breathtaking testament to a people's profound connection to their environment, a desperate and beautiful prayer for survival etched permanently into the face of their world. Hanging within the cathedral in Turin, Italy, a simple piece of linen has fueled one of history's most intense and enduring debates. The Shroud of Turin is a 14-foot-long cloth that bears the faint, haunting image of a man who appears to have suffered crucifixion, complete with wounds matching the biblical account of Jesus of Nazareth. For millions of believers, it is the authentic burial shroud of Christ, a sacred relic of profound power. For skeptics, it is a masterful medieval forgery. The controversy seemed to reach its definitive end in 1988. In a highly publicized scientific effort, 3 independent laboratories were granted permission to perform radiocarbon dating on small samples of the cloth. The results were unanimous, placing the linen's origin between 1260 and 1390. This placed the shroud's creation firmly in the Middle Ages, apparently proving it was a clever fake created over 1,000 years after the crucifixion. Case closed, or so it seemed. Almost immediately, critics of the dating raised compelling questions. They argued that the sample taken came from a corner of the shroud that had been handled, mended, and even damaged by a fire in the 1500s. Could this history have contaminated the fibers with newer carbon, skewing the results toward a much later date? The unique nature of the image itself only deepens the mystery. The figure on the cloth is not painted with any known pigment. It is a superficial discoloration only on the very topmost fibers of the threads, like a perfect photo negative with 3-dimensional information encoded within it. Countless attempts to replicate the shroud's image using medieval techniques have failed. How could a forger from the 1300s have created a perfect photogram-like negative image centuries before the invention of photography, and using a method that modern science still cannot perfectly reproduce? Other lines of evidence point away from medieval Europe. Pollen analysis conducted on the shroud has identified numerous plant species that are native not to France or Italy, but to the region around Jerusalem. These microscopic grains, trapped in the fibers for centuries, suggest a journey that began in the Middle East. The combination of these conflicting facts creates an irresolvable tension. We have the authority of carbon dating on one side, and on the other, a set of physical and biological anomalies that science cannot easily dismiss. The shroud remains suspended between faith and reason, a relic that refuses to give up its final secret, challenging us to wonder if our most advanced tools are capable of understanding a mystery woven into the very threads of time. The haunting image on the Shroud of Turin is a mystery woven into fabric, but another enigma is written across a vast expanse of ocean. A loosely defined area of the Western Atlantic, bordered by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, has become infamous as the Bermuda Triangle, a place where ships and planes are said to vanish without a trace. The legend is built upon a foundation of real and tragic disappearances. In December 1945, 5 United States Navy Avenger torpedo bombers, known as Flight 19, took off from Fort Lauderdale on a routine training mission. The flight leader, an experienced pilot, was soon heard over the radio reporting that his compasses were malfunctioning. He stated that everything looked wrong and that he could not be sure of his location. The planes were lost, and despite an extensive sea search, no wreckage from the 5 aircraft or their 14 crew members was ever found. Adding to the mystery, one of the massive search and rescue planes, a Mariner aircraft with 13 men on board, also disappeared that same day. Even earlier, the case of the USS Cyclops, a massive Navy cargo ship, stunned the nation. In March 1918, the vessel, carrying over 300 people and a load of manganese ore, sailed into the region and was never seen or heard from again. It remains the single largest non-combat loss of life in the history of the United States Navy, with no distress call or wreckage ever recovered. These chilling incidents have fueled a cottage industry of supernatural theories. Some propose the triangle is a portal for alien abductions, snatching vessels from our dimension. Others suggest it sits atop the lost city of Atlantis, and that its fabled power crystals interfere with navigation systems or create devastating vortices that pull objects through time. Yet for every paranormal idea, science offers a more grounded, though no less dramatic explanation. The area is notorious for its sudden and violent weather. Squalls can materialize in minutes, creating treacherous seas that could easily overwhelm a ship or plane. The geography of the seafloor itself is a contributing factor. This region contains the deepest part of the Atlantic Ocean, the Puerto Rico Trench, plunging more than 5 miles down. Any vessel sinking here would fall into an abyss where discovery is nearly impossible. Perhaps the most compelling scientific theory involves methane. Vast reservoirs of methane hydrate, a gas trapped in icy cages, lie buried under the seabed. A sudden landslide or tectonic shift could trigger a catastrophic eruption, releasing immense bubbles of methane that surge toward the surface. When a ship is caught above such an event, the chemistry of the water changes instantly. The gas-saturated sea becomes less dense, losing its buoyancy and causing a vessel to sink like a stone. In the air, a large methane plume could rush into the atmosphere, creating a highly turbulent pocket of air that would cause an aircraft's engines to stall and fail. The Bermuda Triangle may not be a supernatural vortex, but a perfect storm of natural hazards, human fallibility, and the immense, unforgiving power of the deep ocean. The deep ocean guards its secrets well, but history's vanishing acts are not confined to the water. On the sandy shores of what is now North Carolina, an entire community disappeared into thin air. In 1587, a group of about 115 English men, women, and children established the Roanoke colony. Their governor, John White, sailed back to England for desperately needed supplies, but his return was delayed for 3 long years by war. When he finally made it back to Roanoke in 1590, he found the settlement utterly deserted. The houses had been carefully dismantled, and the only clue left behind was a single word carved into a fort post, Croatoan, and another, Crow, carved into a tree. There was no sign of a struggle, no cross, which was the prearranged signal for distress. It was as if the colonists had simply packed up and walked away. The leading theory, one that transforms a tragedy into a story of survival, suggests that is exactly what they did. Facing starvation and isolation, they likely split into smaller groups and sought refuge with the nearby Croatan people, a Native American tribe who had been generally friendly. The carved word was not a cry for help, but a message telling White where they had gone. This idea is supported by later accounts. In the early 1700s, English explorers and settlers in the region began reporting encounters with native people who had gray eyes, spoke English, and claimed to be descended from white colonists. The Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, who are considered by many to be the descendants of the Croatan and other tribes, have oral histories and family names that some researchers believe can be traced back to the lost Roanoke settlers. While definitive proof remains elusive, the assimilation theory offers a hopeful resolution to this centuries-old American mystery. They may not have vanished, but instead they chose to survive by joining a new world, leaving behind only a single cryptic word as their farewell. A ghost ship drifted silently in the Atlantic, a perfect vessel sailing without a single soul on board. This was the chilling scene that greeted the crew of the Dei Gratia in December 1872. They had spotted a familiar ship, the Mary Celeste, and after hailing her with no response, a boarding party made a discovery that would become one of the sea's greatest legends. The ship was seaworthy, with its cargo of 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol still largely intact. A 6-month supply of food and water remained in the stores. The crew's personal belongings, including their pipes and tobacco, were undisturbed. Yet the lifeboat was gone, and the 10 people who had been aboard, including the captain's wife and young daughter, had vanished without a trace. The ship's logbook offered no clear answers, its final entry dated 10 days earlier with no hint of distress. The scene was one of orderly yet frantic abandonment. Theories of piracy were dismissed immediately as no valuables were missing and there was no sign of a struggle. Sea monsters and alien abductions are thrilling fictions, but the truth likely lies in a terrifying, split-second decision made by an experienced captain. One of the most compelling explanations centers on the ship's volatile cargo. 9 of the alcohol barrels in the hold were later found to be empty, their red oak staves porous and leaking. In the confined, heated space of the hold, high-proof alcohol fumes would have built up, creating an invisible, explosive atmosphere. Captain Benjamin Briggs was a seasoned mariner, but he was also carrying his family. If he or his crew heard a groaning noise from the hold, or perhaps even saw a small, contained explosion blow off one of the hatch covers, the fear would have been instantaneous and overwhelming. Believing the entire ship was about to be torn apart in a massive blast, the order would have been given to abandon ship with desperate speed. They would have bundled into the single lifeboat, tethered to the Mary Celeste by a strong rope, expecting to see the vessel erupt into flames at any moment. But the catastrophic explosion never came. The fumes may have vented or the danger simply passed. Then, in a cruel twist of fate, the rope tethering the lifeboat to the safety of the larger ship likely snapped in a sudden gust of wind. The crew, adrift in a small boat in the vast Atlantic, would have been left to the mercy of the sea, while the perfectly sound Mary Celeste sailed on without them. Another plausible theory suggests a sudden, violent encounter with nature. A waterspout touching down near the ship could have caused severe, but not fatal, structural shaking, convincing the crew the vessel was breaking apart. Or a minor seaquake releasing bubbles of methane gas from the seabed could have roiled the water and created a low rumbling sound mimicking the terrifying noise of the hull cracking. In their panic, they fled from a threat that was more perceived than real, a decision that sealed their fate the moment they cut themselves loose from the ship that could have saved them. The mystery of the Mary Celeste is not one of supernatural forces, but of human psychology, a stark reminder that in the face of the unknown ocean, a single moment of perfectly reasonable fear can be the most dangerous force of all. The vast ocean can swallow ships without a trace, but within the cold stone walls of a royal fortress, two boys vanished from history itself. In the year 1483, King Edward IV of England died unexpectedly, leaving his 12-year-old son, also named Edward, as the heir. The boy and his younger brother, Richard, were placed in the Tower of London, which was then a royal residence as much as a prison, to await the older boy's coronation. They were seen playing in the courtyard, and then they were gone. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had been appointed Lord Protector, but he swiftly declared his nephews illegitimate and seized the crown for himself as King Richard III. The boys were never seen again, and for over 500 years, the king has stood condemned in the court of public opinion as the murderer of his own kin. The case against him seems powerful. He had the clearest motive, the throne itself, and the absolute power to make the princes disappear. Yet, history is rarely so simple, and compelling theories point the finger of guilt at another ambitious noble. One of the prime suspects is Richard's own former ally, Henry Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham. Buckingham had been instrumental in Richard's rise to power, but he later led a massive rebellion against the new king. Could his rebellion have been an act of guilt, or perhaps a desperate attempt to cover his own tracks? Some historians suggest Buckingham, acting on his own initiative to curry favor with Richard, had the boys killed. When the deed proved too monstrous, even for a medieval court, Richard may have turned on him, forcing Buckingham's hand. An even more tantalizing theory suggests the princes never died in the tower at all. What if they were secretly smuggled to safety, and the pretenders who later challenged King Henry VII were not impostors but the genuine articles? The most famous of these was Perkin Warbeck, a young man who claimed to be Richard, the younger of the two princes. He gathered international support and led invasions of England, his story so convincing that some European rulers believed him. While Warbeck was ultimately captured and executed after confessing to being an impostor, his confession was likely given under torture, making it unreliable. Could he have been telling the truth all along, the last surviving Plantagenet prince silenced to secure a new dynasty? The final answer may lie not in dusty documents but in genetics. In 1674, workmen at the tower discovered a wooden chest containing the skeletons of two children. These bones were long assumed to be the murdered princes and were eventually interred in Westminster Abbey. Today, the technology exists to perform DNA analysis on these remains, comparing them to the confirmed skeleton of their uncle, King Richard III, which was discovered beneath a Leicester car park in 2012. A definitive genetic match would confirm their identity, and forensic science could potentially determine their age and even cause of death. Yet, the Church of England has so far refused permission for any testing, leaving one of history's most poignant mysteries locked away in a royal vault, a 500-year-old secret waiting for its final witness. While the fate of the English princes remains locked in a royal vault, another sacred relic is said to be guarded in a humble chapel half a world away. The Ark of the Covenant, the gilded chest described in the Bible as containing the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, is one of history's most sought-after treasures. According to the Book of Exodus, it was not merely a container, but a divine weapon capable of leveling armies and striking down any who touched it improperly. After its last mention in the scriptures, placed within Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, it vanishes from the historical record, leaving centuries of speculation in its wake. Yet one nation claims not only to know its location, but to have possessed it for millennia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church holds a sacred tradition that the Ark was brought to their country over 3,000 years ago by Menelik I, the legendary son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. The story, detailed in their national epic, the Kebra Nagast, tells of Menelik's journey to Jerusalem to meet his father. Upon his return to Axum, he was accompanied by the firstborn sons of the Israelite nobles, who, in a profound act of devotion, secretly brought the Ark with them, replacing it with a perfect replica in the temple. From that moment, the legend states, Ethiopia became the new Zion, the chosen resting place of God's covenant. This is not a hidden theory for them, but a cornerstone of their national and religious identity. The Ark is said to reside today in a small, nondescript chapel, the Chapel of the Tablet, which stands beside the ancient church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum. Its guardian is a single, consecrated monk, appointed for life to watch over the relic, a man who never leaves the sacred grounds and is the only person permitted to see the Ark. He is a living vessel for this sacred duty, and when he dies, another will take his place. The profound secrecy makes verification impossible for outsiders, and the Ethiopian Church has never allowed the artifact to be examined by scientists or historians. For believers, no proof is necessary, for the Ark's presence is felt in the very soul of their faith, its power and history woven into the fabric of their daily worship. This creates a fascinating standoff between empirical history and unshakable tradition. While treasure hunters scour the Middle East for clues, Ethiopia quietly holds to a truth that requires no excavation, a story written not in the sand but in the heart of a nation. While Ethiopia guards its sacred relic in secrecy, another ancient list promises unimaginable wealth to anyone who can solve its riddle. Discovered in a cave near Qumran in 1952, the Copper Scroll stands utterly apart from the other Dead Sea Scrolls. Those were delicate parchments and papyri inscribed with biblical texts and religious commentaries. The Copper Scroll, however, is something else entirely. It is 2 millennia old, but it is made of metal hammered out of thin, corroded copper, and its message is not spiritual but brutally material. It is a list, a straightforward inventory of 64 hiding places, and at each location the scroll claims a fortune is buried. The quantities it describes are almost unbelievable, listing thousands of talents of gold and silver, along with precious oils, incense, and priestly vestments. If its words are true, the total value would be in the billions of dollars today, a hoard that would dwarf most modern treasures. This immediately sparks the central debate. Is this a literal treasure map, a meticulous record of where the vast wealth of the Second Temple in Jerusalem was hidden just before the Roman legions sacked the city in 70 AD? Or could it be something else entirely? Some scholars argue it is a fictional work, perhaps an allegory for spiritual riches or a piece of folklore. Others propose it was an official temple inventory, a dry accounting of sacred items stored in various locations for safekeeping, their metaphorical value outweighing their physical worth. But the scroll's gritty, practical details argue for a more dramatic purpose. Its instructions are strangely specific, mentioning landmarks like gutters, tombs, and cisterns. It reads less like a sacred text and more like a set of hurried, last-ditch instructions written by priests desperate to save their temple's sacred treasury from an advancing army. They would have chosen copper for a simple, brilliant reason. Unlike fragile parchment, copper would survive. It would endure the centuries, waiting in a dark cave for a time when its people could return and reclaim their heritage. This theory transforms the copper scroll from a myth into a historical emergency, a snapshot of a civilization trying to preserve its soul against annihilation. The lure of such a treasure has proven irresistible. For decades, modern-day adventurers and archaeologists have armed themselves with the scroll's cryptic clues, scouring the harsh landscape of modern-day Israel and the West Bank. They have dug under ancient ruins, scanned hillsides with ground-penetrating radar, and descended into deep, water-filled cisterns, all in pursuit of a prize that has eluded everyone. The challenges are immense. The place names used 2,000 years ago are mostly lost to time, and the geography has been reshaped by wars, earthquakes, and centuries of rebuilding. Many of the proposed hiding places now lie beneath bustling cities or in politically sensitive zones, making excavation impossible. Yet the search continues, fueled by the tantalizing possibility that one of the greatest caches of ancient wealth still lies hidden, its location preserved on a fragile sheet of metal, a silent testament to a desperate flight and a promise of riches that has yet to be broken. The promise of hidden gold often leads to sealed chambers, and few openings were as dramatic as that of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. When Howard Carter broke through the sealed doorway, he unleashed not a supernatural curse, but a very real, biological hazard that had been festering for 3,000 years. The legend of the mummy's curse was born from a string of tragic deaths following the tomb's discovery, most famously that of the expedition's financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, who died from an infected mosquito bite mere months after entering the burial chamber. Newspapers at the time sensationalized the events, claiming a curse inscribed on the tomb promised death to those who disturbed the pharaoh's rest. Yet science offers a far more plausible and just as frightening explanation. These tombs were not just rooms, they were sealed ecosystems. For millennia, organic offerings of food, perfumes, and the mummified remains themselves decayed in an airtight environment. This created the perfect breeding ground for toxic molds and bacteria. Modern analysis suggests that ancient spores of Aspergillus niger and other potent fungi could have lain dormant on the walls and artifacts, waiting for a rush of fresh air to aerosolize them. When archaeologists like Carter and his team inhaled this ancient dust, they were essentially breathing in a concentrated dose of pathogens that their modern immune systems had never encountered. The resulting lung infections and fevers could easily have been fatal, especially for someone like Lord Carnarvon, who was in poor health. But mold was not the only silent guardian. Some tombs, particularly those carved into specific types of rock, may have accumulated dangerously high levels of radon gas, a colorless, radioactive byproduct of uranium decay present naturally in the ground. Sealed for centuries, this gas could have built up to lethal concentrations, exposing the first people to enter to a slow, insidious radiation poisoning. Another potential killer was ammonia, produced from the breakdown of nitrogen-rich organic material. A massive, sudden release of ammonia gas upon opening a sealed chamber would be instantly irritating to the eyes and lungs, and in high enough doses it can be fatal. The so-called curse was not a magical spell, but a perfect storm of natural decay and environmental poison. The tombs were booby-trapped not by human design, but by the relentless, invisible chemistry of time itself. While the tombs of Egypt held invisible dangers, the vast oceans were thought to conceal entire lost worlds. In the 1860s, a scientific puzzle gave rise to one of the most enduring legends of a sunken continent. Zoologists were baffled by the curious distribution of lemurs, small primates found abundantly on the island of Madagascar and also in parts of India, but nowhere in between. To explain this geographical separation, British zoologist Philip Sclater proposed a radical solution. He suggested that a massive land bridge, a continent he named Lemuria, had once spanned the Indian Ocean, connecting Madagascar to the Indian subcontinent. This sunken land would have provided a pathway for these animals to migrate, a theory that perfectly solved the biological riddle with the tools of the time. For decades, Lemuria was a respected, if speculative, concept in the scientific community, a logical answer to a perplexing question of nature. Then, the entire foundation of Earth science shifted. The theory of plate tectonics provided the true and far more dramatic explanation. Madagascar and India were indeed once joined, but not by a sinking bridge. They were part of the ancient supercontinent of Gondwana. Around 88 million years ago, colossal geological forces began to pull them apart, slowly drifting them to their current positions and carrying their unique wildlife with them. The lemurs were not evidence of a drowned world, but passengers on a continental raft. With its scientific raison d'etre stripped away, Lemuria should have faded into obscurity. Instead, it was reborn in a far more mystical form. The Theosophical Society, founded by Helena Blavatsky, seized upon the idea and transformed it. In their teachings, Lemuria became a vast Pacific counterpart to the Atlantic's Atlantis, a spiritual homeland for the third root race of humanity. This lost continent was populated not by simple primates, but by a race of advanced telepathic and hermaphroditic beings. They described Lemurians as giant, egg-laying entities with a third eye that granted them psychic powers, a civilization that had reached great spiritual heights before their continent met a catastrophic end. This spiritualized Lemuria captured the public imagination, weaving itself into the fabric of occult traditions, New Age beliefs, and even modern pop culture. The scientific land bridge for lemurs was gone, but the mythical homeland for a lost humanity had firmly taken root, a testament to our enduring desire to find echoes of our own epic past in the empty spaces of the map. The legend of the Holy Grail has captivated seekers for 1,000 years, but what if its true nature was hidden in plain sight, not in a cup's form but in a name? A radical theory brought to modern prominence by books like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and later fictionalized in the Da Vinci Code, makes a startling linguistic claim. It suggests the term Holy Grail is a medieval misinterpretation. The original term, sangreal, can be broken down not as sangreal or Holy Grail, but as sangreal, which translates directly to royal blood. According to this idea, the sacred object of countless quests was never a physical chalice that caught the blood of Christ, but the living, breathing bloodline of Jesus himself. This theory posits that Jesus of Nazareth survived the crucifixion, or that his lineage was established beforehand, and that he had children with Mary Magdalene. Their descendants, the theory claims, became a secret royal dynasty protected through the centuries. The vessel of this sacred bloodline was said to be Mary Magdalene, who, following the crucifixion, fled the Holy Land for the safety of Gaul, modern-day France. There, she was supposedly sheltered by a Jewish community, and her children founded a lineage that would eventually intertwine with European royalty. This is where the story connects to the shadowy corridors of history and the rise of the Merovingian dynasty, the early kings of the Franks. Proponents of the theory point to the Merovingians' long hair, which was considered a source of their supernatural power, and their alleged descent from a mysterious sea creature, as possible coded references to a more divine and exotic origin. They were said to be priest kings possessing a sacred and mysterious authority that set them apart. The protection of this precious lineage, the theory continues, was the sacred duty of a secret society known as the Priory of Sion. Documents discovered in the French National Library in the 1950s, known as the Dossier Secrets, seem to list a long line of Grand Masters for this order, including luminous figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, and Victor Hugo. The Priory's ultimate goal was allegedly to restore the Merovingian bloodline, the supposed heirs of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, to the thrones of Europe. While the Dossier's secrets were later revealed to be a 20th century hoax, the idea had already taken root in the cultural imagination. It presents a profound alternative history, one where the most revered relic is not an object but a family, and where the greatest secret of the Church is not a miracle but a marriage. This transforms the Grail quest from a search for a lost treasure into a hunt for a hidden truth, a truth that, if real, would rewrite the very foundation of Western faith and power. A cataclysm of fire and water once reshaped the Mediterranean world. Around the year 1600 B.C., the volcanic island of Thera, now known as Santorini, detonated with a force unmatched in human history. The eruption was a multi-stage apocalypse, beginning with earthquakes that shattered the landscape, followed by a colossal volcanic explosion that sent cubic miles of rock and ash high into the atmosphere. The island's core collapsed into the sea, creating the vast caldera we see today, and this sudden displacement of the ocean floor generated tsunamis of unimaginable power. These towering walls of water, estimated to be over 100 feet high, radiated outwards, racing across the open sea toward the island of Crete, the heart of the sophisticated Minoan civilization. The Minoans were not a primitive people. Their palaces at Knossos and Akrotiri were architectural marvels, multi-storied complexes with advanced drainage systems, vibrant frescoes, and a culture of trade and artistry that stretched across the ancient world. They were a maritime power, a civilization in its golden age. Then the waves came. The tsunamis would have smashed into the northern coast of Crete, scouring harbors and sweeping inland, destroying the fleet that was the source of Minoan wealth and power. This was followed by a rain of volcanic ash, a thick, suffocating blanket that buried farmlands, poisoned the soil, and collapsed roofs under its weight. The sophisticated Minoan world was brought to its knees not by an invading army, but by the indifferent fury of nature. This real-world disaster provides a compelling historical core for the legend of Atlantis. The timeline fits. The Minoan collapse predates Plato by nearly 1,000 years, ample time for a story of a great civilization vanishing into the sea to be distorted and magnified. How would such a tale have traveled? The Minoans had extensive trade contacts with Egypt, a civilization with a long, documented history. It is entirely plausible that Egyptian scribes recorded the news of this distant catastrophe, the fall of a powerful seafaring kingdom in the northern seas. These accounts, stored in temple archives, could have been the very sources Plato's ancestor Solon accessed during his visit to Egypt, as the philosopher himself claimed. The story would have been translated, passed down through generations, and inevitably embellished. The advanced Minoans, with their intricate palaces and vibrant art, could have been remembered as a godlike race with impossible technology. The concentric rings of the Thera caldera itself, a natural harbor within a volcanic crater, mirror Plato's description of Atlantis' capital with its rings of land and water. The Minoan civilization did not vanish in a single day and night, but its swift decline after the eruption would have felt like a sudden extinction to those who witnessed it. The theory suggests that Atlantis was not a fictional allegory, but a ghost of a real memory, a magnificent culture whose name was lost, but whose spectacular end became the stuff of legend for millennia. Returning to that unassuming clay jar found near Baghdad, its purpose moves from pure speculation into the realm of practical craft. If this object truly was a primitive battery, what could its 1 volt of electricity have actually accomplished? One compelling theory suggests it was a tool for electroplating, a method for depositing a thin layer of precious metal onto a less valuable object. The process would have been elegantly simple. An artisan would have prepared a solution containing gold salts, perhaps by dissolving gold leaf in a weak acid. The iron rod inside the copper cylinder would become the anode, slowly dissolving into the electrolyte, while the object to be plated, a small silver ring or a bronze statue, would be connected to the copper cylinder, becoming the cathode. When the circuit was completed, a fascinating transformation would begin. Microscopic particles of gold suspended in the solution would be drawn to the negatively charged object, clinging to its surface in a slow, steady accumulation. Over time, a dull bronze figure could emerge from the jar with a brilliant, shimmering coat of gold, a deception of wealth and beauty achieved not with hammer and fire, but with chemistry and a tiny, invisible current. This was not magic, but a clever application of natural forces. Think of the countless ancient artifacts in museums worldwide, objects that appear to be solid gold, but may, in fact, be base metals gifted with a luxurious skin. This theory provides a tangible, commercial reason for such a device to exist. It was not for lighting or for medical miracles, but for the marketplace, a tool for artisans to create affordable luxury and amplify the gleam of precious metals they had in short supply. This small jar, then, becomes a window into an ancient workshop, where the first sparks of electrical application were not for power, but for beauty, a subtle technology lost to time until its quiet rediscovery in a modern age. Stretching across the French countryside in Brittany, the Karnak alignments are a breathtaking spectacle of prehistoric engineering. Over 3,000 standing stones march across the landscape in long, precise parallel rows, a silent army frozen in time. Most interpretations paint them as a grand astronomical calendar, their lines pointing to solstice sunrises, or as a sacred processional path for rituals lost to memory. Yet another theory proposes a function both more practical and more brilliant, suggesting these stones were the sensitive components of a massive static seismograph. Imagine the ground beginning to tremble with the first subtle vibrations of a distant earthquake. As those seismic waves traveled through the earth, they would reach the site and interact with the carefully arranged menhirs. The stones, each with a unique shape, size, and depth of placement, would have responded to specific frequencies of vibration. Smaller, more precariously balanced stones might tremble visibly with minor tremors, while larger, more stable monoliths would only resonate with the powerful, low-frequency waves of a major quake. An observer, perhaps a shaman or a keeper of the stones, watching from a nearby vantage point, could interpret this dance of stone. By noting which rows of stones were vibrating and with what intensity, they could not only detect an earthquake but potentially gauge its direction, strength, and distance. This system would offer a crucial window of warning, a way to read the Earth's restless movements. In a region like Brittany, situated on ancient fault lines, the ability to predict or understand seismic activity would be a form of power, a literal way to feel the pulse of the world. This transforms the Karnak stones from a static monument into a dynamic instrument, a sprawling technological achievement that used the landscape itself as a tool for survival, listening for the deep tectonic whispers that could reshape their world in an instant. The silent guardians of Karnak listened for the Earth's deep tremors, but in the vastness of Mongolia, an entire landscape was reshaped to guard a single, profound silence. The death of Genghis Khan in 1227 created an emptiness that history has never been able to fill. The great conqueror, who forged an empire stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, had one final command: that his resting place be forever hidden from the world. His loyal followers carried out this order with terrifying efficiency. According to the Persian historian Rashid al-Din, the funeral procession killed every person they encountered on their journey to the burial site. Once the Khan was laid to rest with treasures gathered from a continent, The soldiers who had built the tomb were themselves massacred by a second group of soldiers, who were then in turn killed by a third. This ruthless chain of secrecy ensured that no living soul could betray the location. But the concealment did not stop there. Legends say that to erase the very memory of the place, an entire river was diverted from its course to flow over the grave, sealing it beneath a new waterway. Alternatively, a forest was planted directly atop the tomb, or 1,000 horses were ridden back and forth over the site until the ground was utterly indistinguishable from the surrounding steppe. The goal was not just to hide a body, but to erase a location from the map to return it to the embrace of nature itself. This has created one of archaeology's ultimate quests, the search for a tomb that might hold not just the remains of the Khan, but the accumulated wealth of his conquests, a treasure that could dwarf any pharaohs. Modern hunters, armed with satellite imagery and advanced ground-penetrating radar, scan the Mongolian landscape from above, searching for unnatural patterns or geological anomalies. They focus on a sacred mountain range called the Kentai Province, a region Genghis himself revered as the birthplace of his ancestor. The challenge is immense, as any physical excavation is widely opposed by the Mongolian people, who view the site as a sacred spiritual center, not a dig site. The search has evolved into a delicate dance of non-invasive technology, using drones and magnetometers to listen to the earth without disturbing it, hoping to hear the echo of a lost river or the geometric shape of a hidden chamber beneath the endless grass. The tomb of Genghis Khan remains the perfect secret, protected as much by reverence and legend as by ancient violence, a treasure not of gold but of eternal silence. The silence of Genghis Khan's tomb stands in stark contrast to another historical void, one filled not with quiet but with taunting messages. In the foggy backdrop of late 1960s California, a serial murderer known only as the Zodiac Killer terrorized the public, not just with his crimes but with his mind games. He sent a series of cryptic letters to local newspapers, each one boasting of his murders and often containing a block of encoded text. A cipher he claimed would reveal his identity if anyone were clever enough to solve it. For decades, these codes were a maddening puzzle. One of them, a 340-character cipher, was finally cracked in 2020 by a team of private citizens, but its solution was a chilling disappointment. It contained no name, no address, only a rambling, nihilistic rant about not wanting to go to hell and collecting slaves for the afterlife. This breakthrough, while historic, only deepened the central mystery. The theory now gains its power from what remains unbroken. The most famous of the unsolved codes is known as the Zodiac's 340 cipher, a block of symbols that has withstood the efforts of the world's top cryptographers for over half a century. The compelling idea is that the killer, a man who clearly craved recognition and intellectual superiority, would not have gone to such lengths if his ciphers were merely empty boasts. He promised his name was hidden within them, and his meticulous nature suggests he may have been telling the truth. This is where modern technology offers a new kind of key. Where human codebreakers have struggled to find patterns, advanced artificial intelligence can analyze the symbols at a scale and speed beyond human capacity. An AI can be trained on every known language and cipher system, testing millions of potential solutions per second, searching for linguistic patterns or statistical anomalies that the human eye would never detect. It could cross-reference the structure of the codes with public records from that era, looking for a hidden signature. The possibility exists that the Zodiac's identity is not lost, but simply locked, waiting for the right digital lockpick to turn in the mechanism. His final cipher is a time capsule from a killer who believed he was smarter than everyone, a challenge thrown down across the decades. The question is no longer just who he was, but whether our newest tools are finally sharp enough to answer the taunt of a ghost. Off the coast of Nova Scotia lies a small, unassuming island that has consumed fortunes and lives for over 2 centuries. Oak Island is home to the infamous Money Pit, a deep, complex shaft that has lured treasure hunters with the promise of an immense reward protected by devious, ancient engineering. Since its discovery in the 1700s, searchers have dug deeper and deeper, only to be repeatedly thwarted by a brilliantly designed defense system. Each time workers reach a certain depth, seawater violently floods the shaft, forcing them to abandon their quest. This is no accident, but the work of a sophisticated network of flood tunnels, carefully engineered to link the pit to the ocean, ensuring its secrets remain guarded by the sea itself. The sheer complexity of this system points to builders of extraordinary skill, far beyond simple pirates. This has led to a compelling theory that the money pit is not a pirate stash, but a vault constructed by the most powerful and secretive order of the Middle Ages, the Knights Templar. When the order was brutally suppressed by King Philip IV of France in the early 1300s, their vast wealth, accumulated from centuries of banking and trade, seemingly vanished from history. Could a fleet of Templar ships have crossed the Atlantic, carrying their most sacred relics and treasures to a new, hidden world? The engineering on Oak Island, with its precise tunnels and clever hydraulics, matches the Templars' known expertise in cathedral construction and military architecture. And what might they have buried in such an impregnable vault? Speculation runs to the most legendary artifacts of all, perhaps the Holy Grail itself or the Ark of the Covenant, treasures too precious to risk falling into the hands of their enemies. The island itself offers tantalizing physical clues. A strange, triangular swamp aligns with sacred geometry, and a stone inscribed with mysterious symbols was found deep within the pit, its message still debated. For generations, the hunt has continued, a modern obsession fueled by an ancient mystery, each new excavation hoping to finally answer the question of what and who lies buried beneath the mud and rock of Oak Island. A fragment of calfskin parchment, drawn in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, presents a geographical paradox that defies its own time. The map, a compilation of older source charts as Reis himself noted, accurately depicts the eastern coast of South America and the western coast of Africa with a precision that was remarkable for the era. But it is the southernmost landmass that ignites a firestorm of controversy. Stretching below the Atlantic, the map shows a terrain that some researchers argue is a shockingly accurate representation of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica, a continent that would not be officially discovered for another 300 years. The most baffling detail is not just its existence on the map, but its condition. This depiction appears to show the coastline not as a solid, icy shield, but as a landmass free of its immense glacial covering. This presents an impossible dilemma. Modern science confirms that the Antarctic ice cap is ancient, having enveloped the continent for millions of years. No human from the age of exploration, or even from classical antiquity, could have seen that coastline in an ice-free state. So how did it end up on a 16th century Turkish map? The theory posits that Piri Reis was telling the truth about his sources, and that one of those source maps was incredibly old, a relic from a pre-glacial epoch. This would mean that a sophisticated, seafaring civilization capable of accurate global cartography must have existed over 10,000 years ago, mapping the world during a period when Antarctica was at least partially green. They would have possessed knowledge of spherical trigonometry and longitude, skills that were lost and only rediscovered centuries later. Mainstream scholars offer a different interpretation. They suggest the southern land is a cartographic composite, a fanciful extension of the Patagonian coast blended with legendary southern continents that mapmakers had speculated about since Ptolemy. The apparent accuracy, they argue, is a coincidence born from the map's stylized distortions and our own desire to see a modern coastline in its ancient lines. Yet the resemblance remains haunting. Could this single piece of parchment be a copy of a copy, a faded echo from a time when our planet looked profoundly different, preserved by chance in the library of an Ottoman admiral? It is a ghost in the cartographic machine, a silent challenge from the past that asks us to reconsider everything we know about the timeline of human discovery. A strange drone permeates the air in the quiet desert town of Taos, New Mexico, a persistent low-frequency hum that only about 2% of the local population can actually hear. Described as a distant, idling diesel engine, this Taos hum is a real and deeply frustrating phenomenon for those who perceive it, often causing sleepless nights, headaches, and a sense of unshakable unease. Official investigations have repeatedly pointed to mundane causes, suggesting it is simply a form of mass tinnitus or the collective noise of distant industry. Yet for the hearers, these explanations feel entirely inadequate, failing to capture the hum's external, physical presence that seems to vibrate through their very bones. This disconnect fuels a far more unsettling theory that the sound is not natural at all, but the audible byproduct of a secret government project. The most persistent idea involves a deep Earth communications system for nuclear submarines. The military uses extremely low-frequency radio waves to send messages to vessels cruising in the ocean depths, and these powerful transmissions can generate a secondary acoustic effect, a faint hum resonating through the ground itself. Could the select few in Taos be unwittingly hearing the secret chatter of the nation's ballistic missile subs? Other speculations point to psychological operations. The hum could be a form of subliminal messaging or a test of sonic weapons designed to disorient a population, a quiet experiment running just below the threshold of most people's hearing. Perhaps it is the emission from a massive classified energy project like a wireless power transmission grid, whose operational frequency accidentally falls within the narrow auditory range of a small segment of humanity. The true source remains classified not because it is alien or supernatural, but because it is a national secret, a constant low thrum of power whose origin is hidden in plain sound. A single sheet of computer printout marked with a simple word in red pen became one of the most profound mysteries in the search for cosmic company. On an August night in 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University was silently scanning the sky as part of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence program. It was a routine sweep until the data stream suddenly erupted. For 72 seconds, a powerful, focused signal blazed into the receiver, a signal so perfect it defied any natural explanation. It was a narrowband radio transmission concentrated on one specific frequency, the exact kind of signal scientists had predicted an advanced civilization would use to announce its presence across the interstellar void. The astronomer on duty, Jerry Amon, circled the alphanumeric sequence on the printout and, in a moment of pure astonishment, scribbled one word beside it: "Wow." The signal's intensity rose and fell in a perfect curve, precisely matching what you would expect as the telescope's fixed receiver drifted past a distant, stationary point source. It was a textbook signature for an artificial transmission from deep space. The specific frequency it used, 1420 MHz, is a protected band, a quiet channel where earthly transmissions are forbidden, making it the perfect interstellar hailing frequency. The hunt began immediately. For decades, astronomers have pointed their most powerful dishes back toward that same patch of sky in the constellation Sagittarius, listening intently for a repeat for any confirmation. They have heard only silence. This profound lack of a follow-up is what makes the wow signal so compelling and so frustrating. It suggests the signal was not a continuous broadcast, but perhaps a one-time event, a single, powerful flash in the cosmic dark. Imagine a lighthouse whose beam sweeps across a distant shore only once every 1,000 years. If you happen to be looking at that exact spot for that single, brilliant moment, you witness the light. If you blink, you miss it forever. The wow signal could have been just that, an interstellar beacon, a message meant not for us specifically, but for anyone who happened to be listening at the right place and the right cosmic time. We may have intercepted a greeting that was never repeated, a call from across the galaxy that we heard just once, leaving us forever to wonder what or who was on the other end of the line. In the sweltering summer of 1518, the city of Strasbourg was seized by a madness that defied all reason. It began with a single woman, Frau Trophia, who stepped into the street and began to dance. There was no music, no celebration, only a frantic, compulsive jig that she could not stop. Within a week, dozens had joined her, and within a month, the crowd of uncontrollable dancers had swelled to over 400 souls. They danced for days on end, their feet bleeding, their bodies pushed far beyond the brink of exhaustion. Records from the time grimly note that as many as 15 people per day were dying from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer physical collapse, their final moments spent in a ceaseless, agonizing dance. What force could possibly command the human body to dance itself to death? For a long time, the leading suspect was ergot poisoning, a fungus that grows on damp rye and contains compounds similar to LSD. But this explanation falters under scrutiny. Ergotism, known historically as St. Anthony's fire, causes violent muscle spasms, convulsions, gangrene, and terrifying hallucinations. It does not cause coordinated, rhythmic dancing for days on end. The movements witnessed in Strasbourg were a bizarre, sustained performance, not the writhing seizures of toxin-induced agony. Others have proposed a rogue religious cult, but the dancers were not willing participants. They were trapped, pleading for help and crying out in terror as their limbs moved without their consent. The most compelling answer lies not in poison or doctrine, but in the profound power of the mind over the body, a phenomenon known as mass psychogenic illness. Imagine the backdrop of Strasbourg in that era. The community was shattered by extreme stress, living in the shadow of relentless famine, devastating diseases like syphilis and smallpox, and crippling poverty. The people were steeped in a superstitious belief system that held that Saint Vito would curse those who offended him with a dancing mania. When one person, likely suffering from a stress-induced dissociative state, began to dance, it acted as a psychological trigger. In a population already vibrating with anxiety and shared fear, the behavior spread like a psychic virus. It was a perfect storm of societal trauma. Seeing their neighbors dance without control, individuals became convinced they were struck by the same curse, their own anxiety and suggestibility manifesting the exact same physical symptoms. This was not a choice, but a physical breakdown driven by a collective, subconscious hysteria. The dancing plague was a tragic, physical cry of distress from an entire community, a terrifying demonstration of how deeply our minds are wired together and how, under the right conditions of fear and belief, the human body can become a prison of its own making. Early in the morning of June 30th, 1908, a fireball brighter than the sun streaked across the skies of a remote Siberian wilderness. The explosion that followed was so immense it flattened an estimated 80 million trees across 800 square miles, a radial pattern of devastation pointing to a single, cataclysmic airburst. For decades, the official explanation pointed to a stony asteroid, perhaps 100 meters wide, vaporizing several miles above the ground. Yet this theory leaves behind a stubborn absence, a missing piece of evidence that fuels an alternative idea. Where is the crater? Where is the field of debris you would expect from a solid rock from space? The comet theory provides a compelling answer. Unlike a dense, metallic asteroid, a comet is essentially a colossal, dirty snowball, a loose aggregation of ice, dust, and frozen gases. When such an object tears into the Earth's atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour, the pressure and heat are unimaginable. The fragile comet would not have survived to strike the ground. Instead, it would have undergone a rapid, total disintegration, unleashing its immense kinetic energy in a single, blinding flash of heat and a devastating shockwave that hammered the forest below. This explains the perfect airburst effect, the lack of a significant impact crater, and the absence of any large meteorite fragments. The comet, being mostly ice, would have left behind only microscopic traces of dust and vaporized material, evidence too fine and scattered for early 20th century investigators to easily find. This theory transforms the Tunguska event from a near-miss impact into a direct hit by a different kind of celestial body, one that delivered all the destructive power of a nuclear bomb without leaving a single stone behind as its calling card. The Tunguska event left behind a mystery written in fallen trees, but another disappearance was written in the shifting sands of the Middle East in 53b. C. The ambitious Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus led a mighty army of over 40,000 men into a catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Carrhae. The Parthian horse archers decimated his legions and Crassus himself was killed. While some Romans were captured or enslaved, an entire contingent of his army, thousands of soldiers, simply vanished from the historical record. They were swallowed by the deserts of Mesopotamia, their fate a blank space in Rome's imperial history. A tantalizing theory suggests these lost legionaries did not perish, but marched east for years, eventually finding a new home at the very edge of the known world. Ancient Chinese chronicles from the Han Dynasty mention the establishment of a town called Lycian in the remote Gansu corridor. The accounts describe its settlers as having a distinctly foreign appearance with light hair, green or blue eyes, and tall statures. Even more compelling, these records note that the defenders of Lycian used a unique military tactic described as the fish scale formation. To historians, this is a startlingly precise description of the Roman testudo, the famous tortoise formation where soldiers interlocked their shields overhead and on all sides, creating a scaled, impregnable shell. Could this be the legacy of Crassus's lost men, resettled by the Parthians as frontier guards on their eastern border, so far from home that they became a permanent part of the local population? The legend persists today in the modern village of Zhelajai, which some identify with ancient Lycian. Residents with strikingly Caucasian features have sparked scientific curiosity, leading to DNA testing. While the results have been complex and not definitively conclusive, some studies have indeed found genetic markers typical of Western Eurasian populations among the villagers. The evidence is a mosaic of intriguing pieces, a historical account, a unique military description, and lingering physical traits, all pointing to an astonishing possibility. It suggests that in the 1st century B.C., a band of Roman soldiers, survivors of one of history's great military disasters, did not vanish, but journeyed across continents to become a strange, permanent footnote in the rise of ancient China. While European ships were still timidly hugging coastlines, the Ming dynasty was launching armadas of staggering proportions into the open ocean. Under the command of the Muslim eunuch Admiral Zheng He, the treasure fleet was a floating city of technological marvels. His largest ships, the legendary treasure ships, were over 400 feet long, with 9 masts and multiple decks, dwarfing the tiny vessels Columbus would use nearly a century later. These were not just ships, they were statements of power, carrying thousands of sailors, diplomats, and soldiers on voyages of trade and diplomacy across the Indian Ocean, all the way to the coast of Africa. The scale of these expeditions was so vast, and their records so deliberately purged by later emperors, that a radical question emerged. Could these fleets have ventured even farther, crossing the Pacific to the western shores of the Americas decades before Columbus ever set sail? This is the core of historian Gavin Menzies' controversial hypothesis. He argues that surviving Chinese star charts, combined with interpreted copies of Zheng He's own maps, show a detailed knowledge of the world, including the Americas. One such map, the so-called Kangnido map from Korea, is believed to have been based on Chinese sources from the early 15th century and depicts a landmass to the east that some argue resembles North America. Menzies and others point to alleged archaeological evidence scattered across the continents, from ancient Chinese anchors found off the California coast to purported Ming-style shipwrecks in the Caribbean. They suggest that the fleet not only reached the Americas but left behind colonies and a cultural legacy, pointing to linguistic similarities and shared customs between Chinese and Native American cultures. The mainstream historical view, however, remains deeply skeptical. The evidence is circumstantial at best, and the Cangnedo map is more credibly interpreted as a stylized, speculative depiction of Asia. The physical artifacts, like the stone anchors, are often impossible to definitively date or link to Zheng He's fleet, and could be from much later periods of Chinese contact. Yet the theory endures because it challenges a fundamental pillar of our historical narrative. It asks us to re-examine a world where the flow of discovery was not a one-way street from Europe outward, but a potential web of intercontinental contact where the greatest seafaring power of its age may have glimpsed a new world and, for reasons lost to imperial politics, turned its back and sailed for home, leaving only ambiguous clues in its wake. The sun-bleached streets of post-war Los Angeles were the stage for a crime so brutal it has never truly faded from memory. In January 1947, the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was discovered in a vacant lot, posed with a chilling, theatrical cruelty. The press dubbed her the Black Dahlia, and her murder became an instant, unsolvable legend, a vortex of false confessions and dead ends that consumed the Los Angeles Police Department for decades. Among the countless suspects, one name stands out with a uniquely disturbing weight: that of Dr. George Hodel, a prominent and wealthy physician. The most compelling evidence against him did not come from a police file, but from his own family, unearthed by his son, Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD homicide detective. After his father's death, Steve began a personal investigation that revealed a man living a sinister double life. Dr. Hodel moved in the most elite circles of Los Angeles society, his home a gathering place for artists and intellectuals, yet private recordings made by the police in the 1950s captured a different man entirely. On those secret wires, George Hodel can be heard making statements that sound like confessions, coldly speculating that the police could not prove a case against him now, and in one bone-chilling moment uttering the words, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia." This was not just the angry rant of a man under suspicion. It was the calculated murmur of someone who knew exactly how the game was played. The connections run even deeper, pointing to a killer with a specific and horrifying skill set. The mutilation of Elizabeth Short's body was performed with a precision that suggested medical or surgical knowledge, a clean, professional dismemberment. Dr. Hodel, as a licensed physician, certainly possessed that knowledge. His son's investigation further links him to the infamous lipstick murders in Chicago, and even to the grisly death of his own secretary, whose severed head was found in a Los Angeles park. The theory paints a portrait of a brilliant, narcissistic psychopath who used his social standing as the perfect camouflage, hiding in plain sight while the city he lived in tore itself apart looking for a monster. He was investigated intensely at the time, but the case was never brought to trial, leaving the official file forever open and the ghost of the Black Dahlia forever waiting for a justice that may have lived just next door, behind the closed doors of a respected doctor's mansion. A secret so dangerous it had to be hidden behind a mask not of iron but of black velvet. For over 3 decades in the 17th century, a nameless prisoner was moved between French fortresses, his face perpetually concealed, his identity a state secret known only to the king himself. He was the man in the iron mask, and his existence was a ghost in the machinery of absolute power. The most explosive theory to explain this enigma suggests the mask was not to hide a face but to conceal a perfect reflection. What if this prisoner was the identical twin brother of King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself? The implications are staggering. In the rigid laws of royal succession, an older twin would hold the legitimate claim to the throne. From the moment of their birth, this boy would have been a living, breathing threat to his brother's destiny. a duplicate heir whose very existence could shatter the divine right of kings and plunge France into a brutal war of succession. His imprisonment would not have been an act of cruelty, but one of cold political necessity. To secure the kingdom and his own power, Louis would have had his brother erased from history, given a number instead of a name, and hidden away in a series of comfortable but inescapable prisons. The mask then becomes a perfect, terrifying solution. It allowed the twin to be cared for by guards and servants without them ever seeing the king's own face staring back at them from a prison cell. Imagine the horror of a jailer realizing his charge was the monarch's perfect double. This theory transforms the story from a simple mystery into a profound dynastic tragedy, a tale of a man who was born with everything, only to have his life stolen to ensure his brother could shine as the one and only Sun King. A chamber of pure sunlight crafted from solidified golden resin vanished in the final, chaotic days of the Second World War. The Amber Room was no mere collection of jewels, but an entire chamber, its walls a mosaic of 6 tons of carved amber panels, backed with gold leaf and framed by ornate mirrors. A gift from Prussia to the Russian Tsar Peter the Great in the early 1700s, it was installed in the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, where it glowed with an otherworldly light, a masterpiece of Baroque art often called the eighth wonder of the world. When Nazi forces invaded the Soviet Union, they dismantled the room with chilling efficiency, packing its priceless panels into crates and shipping them to Königsberg Castle in East Prussia, where they were put on display as a trophy of conquest. Then, as the Red Army closed in on the city in 1945, the trail goes cold. The official Soviet investigation concluded that the room was destroyed when the castle was heavily bombed and burned, its fragile amber panels reduced to smoke and ash. But such a definitive end feels unsatisfying for an object of such legendary beauty. A compelling theory suggests the destruction was a carefully staged deception. Would the Nazis, who had so meticulously catalogued and preserved their plunder, simply leave a prize like the Amber Room to be captured or destroyed? The sheer effort of crating it up implies a plan for its preservation, not its annihilation. This has fueled a decades-long hunt, with treasure seekers convinced the room was hidden away in a secret repository, waiting for a time of peace that never came for its protectors. Could it have been loaded onto a ship like the Wilhelm Gustloff, which was torpedoed and sunk in the Baltic Sea with an immense loss of life, its hold potentially carrying the crated panels to a cold, dark resting place on the seabed? Or was it sealed within one of the many labyrinthine mines or underground fortresses that dotted the German countryside, a forgotten treasure in a sealed tunnel, its location lost with the soldiers who hid it? The search continues, a quest for a ghost of gilded amber, a whisper that one of the greatest works of art ever created might still be out there, waiting in the darkness for its golden light to be seen once more. 2 ships frozen in time and ice held the answer to a Victorian tragedy. The HMS Erebus and HMS Terror set sail from England in 1845 under the command of Sir John Franklin, a seasoned explorer tasked with conquering the final, elusive prize of Arctic navigation, the Northwest Passage. With a crew of 129 men and provisions for 3 years, they were the best-equipped expedition of their age, boasting steam engines, reinforced hulls, and even a small library. They were last seen by whaling ships in Baffin Bay, heading into the labyrinth of ice, and then they vanished. For decades, the fate of the Franklin expedition was one of the world's great mysteries, a ghost story whispered on the polar winds. The first chilling clues came not from the ships but from the land. Inuit hunters told stories of starving, desperate white men dragging sleds across the tundra, and of campsites littered with human bones that showed clear signs of being cut and broken. The official search parties sent by a worried Britain found a single grim note left in a stone cairn on King William Island. It revealed that Franklin had died in 1847, that the ships had been trapped in ice for over a year and that the surviving crew had abandoned them in a desperate bid to walk to safety. The final, haunting line stated they were starting for a distant river. None of them made it. The theory that gives this tragedy a deeper, more insidious layer centers not on the ice, but on the very food meant to sustain them. The expedition carried over 8,000 tins of meat, vegetables, and soup, a modern marvel of preservation, but this technology had a fatal flaw. The cans were sealed with lead solder, a common practice at the time. As the food sat, and especially when the cans were opened and the contents heated, lead from the solder would have leached directly into the provisions. The entire crew, over the months and years of their ordeal, would have been consuming a slow-acting poison. We now know the horrific effects of chronic lead poisoning. It attacks the mind and body with terrifying efficiency. It causes severe abdominal pain, weakness, and fatigue, making the already brutal physical labor of surviving in the Arctic utterly unbearable. It leads to paranoia, hallucinations, and dramatic personality changes, eroding judgment and making rational, cooperative decision-making impossible. Imagine the scene. Men already facing starvation and freezing temperatures are also being systematically poisoned by their own supplies. Their leaders, Franklin and his officers, would have been suffering cognitive decline just when clear-headed command was most critical. The descent into madness and chaos becomes tragically understandable. This theory was given powerful support by the forensic examination of the few, remarkably preserved bodies buried early in the expedition on Beechey Island. Autopsies revealed staggeringly high levels of lead in their hair and bones, levels consistent with prolonged systemic poisoning. The lead did not kill them directly, but it crippled them, weakening their bodies and shattering their minds. It turned a struggle for survival into a guaranteed death sentence. When the food ran out, the evidence suggests the survivors turned to the last, unthinkable recourse. Cut marks on human bones found at campsites confirm that cannibalism occurred. This was not an act of monsters, but of men broken by the Arctic, by starvation, and by the invisible poison flowing through their veins. The Franklin expedition was not simply defeated by the cold. It was betrayed by the very technology that was supposed to ensure its triumph, a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers are the ones we carry with us. Rising from a rural Georgia hilltop stood a stark granite monument that seemed to speak from the future. The Georgia Guidestones, erected in 1980 by a man using the pseudonym R. C. Christian, presented 10 directives carved in 8 modern languages, a message for a world rebuilt from catastrophe. Its first commandment was the most shocking: to maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. The stones called for a new world guided by reason, with wise reproduction, unity, and a court to settle international disputes. This was not a relic from a lost civilization, but a modern artifact designed to outlast our own, a stark blueprint for a post-apocalyptic age. The mystery of its creators was as profound as its message. Who was R.C. Christian, and what group did he represent? The name itself is a powerful clue, leading many to the Rosicrucian Order, a centuries-old esoteric fraternity whose legendary founder, Christian Rosencreuz, translates directly to Christian Rose Cross. The idea that a secretive, intellectual society was behind the Guidestones fits the monument's tone, a cold, rational plan for human survival stripped of all current religions and nationalities. Others speculated it was the work of a wealthy survivalist cult or a cabal of powerful elites, a theory that made the Guidestones a target for intense controversy. To some, the call for a global population of only 500 million was not a hopeful guideline, but a terrifying mandate for mass depopulation. The stones were seen as a pagan Ten Commandments, an overt attempt to replace biblical law with a new, ecological spirituality that placed the earth above the individual. This interpretation transformed the quiet Georgia field into a battleground of ideologies, where the monument was both a beacon of hope for a sustainable future and a symbol of a dystopian, controlled one. Its physical fate was sealed not by time but by dynamite, damaged in a bombing and later fully demolished by the county authorities. The stones are gone, but the questions they raised remain etched in the modern psyche, forcing us to confront what we would preserve if our world ended, and who we would trust to write the instructions for the one to come. Deep in the heart of Death Valley, a stark and beautiful contradiction unfolds across the dry lakebed of Racetrack Playa. Here, on the sun-baked clay, heavy rocks leave behind long, meandering trails as if they have simply decided to go for a stroll. For over a century, these sailing stones presented a perfect natural mystery. How could rocks weighing hundreds of pounds slide across a flat desert, carving paths in the mud without any visible force pushing them? The theories were as wild as the landscape. Some suggested powerful magnetic fields hidden deep beneath the earth were pulling them along. Others whispered that the isolated playa was a landing site for alien craft, with the rocks being nudged aside by otherworldly visitors. The true answer, however, is a masterpiece of subtle, natural engineering that requires a perfect and fleeting alignment of conditions. The secret is not magnetism but ice. During the winter months, this brutally hot desert can experience a brief, cold window. When a rare rain falls on the playa, it creates a shallow, temporary pond. If the night that follows is cold enough, this thin layer of water freezes into vast, clear sheets of ice, sometimes only a quarter of an inch thick. The rocks become partially encased in this frozen pane. Then the sun rises. As the ice begins to melt and break apart under the morning light, it fractures into large, floating panels. A gentle desert wind, often no stronger than a steady breeze, pushes against these expansive sheets of ice. The ice, in turn, grips the embedded rocks and slowly, inexorably, pushes them across the soft, wet mud below. The entire process is a silent, graceful ballet of physics, with the rocks moving at speed so slow they are imperceptible to the human eye, sometimes traveling only a few inches per minute. This explanation was finally confirmed by a dedicated research team who staked out the playa and captured the entire event on time-lapse photography. They witnessed the precise recipe of water, ice, and wind in action, solving a mystery that had captivated imaginations for generations. The sailing stones are not propelled by magic or aliens, but by the delicate, transient power of a winter morning in the desert, a quiet reminder that even the most inexplicable events often have a beautifully simple logic waiting to be discovered. The foggy, gaslit streets of Victorian London held a terror that has never truly been banished. The name Jack the Ripper is a ghost, a label for a series of brutal murders in the Whitecapel district in 1888 that remain the most infamous unsolved crimes in history. The killer targeted the most vulnerable women in the city, and the sheer brutality of the mutilations, combined with taunting letters sent to the police, created a media frenzy and a public panic that echoes to this day. Over the years, the list of suspects has grown to a bewildering cast of characters, from royalty and physicians to artists and madmen, each theory more elaborate than the last. Yet one name stands apart, not from modern speculation, but from the original police files themselves. Aaron Kosminski was a 23-year-old Polish-Jewish immigrant who worked as a barber, and he was considered a prime suspect by no less than Sir Melville Macnaghten, the head of the Criminal Investigation Department. In his confidential memoranda, Macnaghten described Kosminski as a man with homicidal tendencies and a great hatred of women, who had to be committed to an asylum not long after the murders ended. He was known to the police, he was in the right area, and he fit the profile of a local man whose insanity could explain the horrific violence. For over a century, this was where the theory sat, a compelling but unproven lead in a crowded field. Then, a modern scientific breakthrough promised to finally crack the case. A shawl, allegedly belonging to one of the Ripper's victims, Catherine Eddowes, was said to have been taken from the crime scene by a police officer and preserved by his family for generations. In 2014, a businessman and amateur sleuth named Russell Edwards had the shawl subjected to advanced forensic analysis. The results, announced with great fanfare, pointed directly at Aaron Kosminski. Scientists claimed to have extracted mitochondrial DNA from what they identified as bloodstains on the shawl, and they found a match with a living descendant of Kosminski's sister. Furthermore, they claimed to have found semen stains on the fabric, and from that they recovered what they believed was the killer's DNA. The evidence seemed to be a slam dunk, a scientific solution to a 130-year-old mystery. But the case is far from closed. The story of the shawl is riddled with problems from the very start. There is no official record of any officer taking such a crucial piece of evidence from the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder. The chain of custody over more than a century is impossible to verify, leaving the shawl's authenticity in serious doubt. Forensic experts have also questioned the DNA findings. Mitochondrial DNA is not unique to a single individual. It is passed down through the maternal line and shared by many relatives. A match to a descendant of Kosminski's sister does not definitively prove the blood was his. It only proves it could have come from someone in that same broad maternal family. The area of Waitakapel was a densely populated immigrant community, and such a genetic match could easily be a coincidence. The idea that viable semen DNA could survive, untested and unconfirmed, for over a century on a fabric shawl exposed to the elements of a filthy Victorian street, and then decades of storage, is also viewed with extreme skepticism by many in the scientific community. So we are left with a tantalizing but deeply flawed puzzle. The police at the time clearly believed Aaron Kosminski was their man, a suspect from the very world where the murders occurred. The modern DNA evidence, while controversial, adds a powerful 21st century whisper that seems to confirm their century-old suspicions. Yet the ghost of Jack the Ripper is a slippery one, protected by time, by missing evidence, and by the very science that promised to unmask him. We may have the right name, but we will likely never have the certainty to close the file for good. The script for Jack the Ripper may be permanently incomplete, but another object, far older and just as silent, offers a different kind of mystery. Unearthed in the Minoan Palace of Phaistos on Crete in 1908, the Phaistos disc is a small, baked clay tablet, roughly the size of a modern dinner plate. Its face is its entire story, covered on both sides with a spiral of 241 symbols, each one not drawn by hand but stamped into the clay with individual seals. This unique method makes it the oldest known example of movable type printing in the world, a technology that would not appear again for over 3,000 years. Yet from the moment of its discovery, a shadow of doubt has followed it. Some archaeologists have argued it is simply too perfect, an elaborate hoax planted by its finder to enhance his own reputation. They point to its singular nature, with no other object like it ever found in Crete or anywhere else. But if it is genuine, it is a voice from the heart of the Minoan civilization, a message pressed into clay around 1700 BC, and we have no idea how to listen. For those who believe in its authenticity, the disc is a maddening puzzle. The 45 distinct symbols include recognizable images: a helmeted head, a captive with bound arms, a bee, a ship, and a shield. They are arranged in clear groups, separated by lines, suggesting words or phrases. But what do they say? The attempts at decipherment read like a catalogue of human ingenuity and obsession. Some researchers, noting the repetition of certain symbol sequences, believe it is a religious hymn, a prayer to a Minoan goddess, with the spiral representing a sacred labyrinth. Others have proposed it is a complex geometric theorem, a mathematical proof rendered in symbols. There are theories that it is a list of names, perhaps of kings or heroes, or even a legal document recording the ownership of land. One of the most compelling ideas is that it represents a syllabic script, where each symbol stands for a specific sound, a unique and otherwise lost writing system that existed alongside the still undeciphered linear script of the Minoan. This theory suggests the disk is not an anomaly, but a key, a single surviving artifact from a parallel written tradition that vanished when the Minoan palaces fell. Every proposed translation, however, remains in the realm of speculation, unable to be proven. The Phaistos disk holds its secret tightly, a locked room with no other doors, challenging us to wonder if we are looking at an ancient tax record, an epic poem, or a message that was never meant for us to read. The silence of the Phaistos disk is profound, but in the wet, dark peat bogs of northern Europe, the past has been preserved with chilling clarity. These are the bog bodies, men and women who sank into the acidic, oxygen-poor water thousands of years ago, their skin tanned to leather and their features frozen in time. At first glance, they seem to be victims of brutal murder or harsh punishment, left to vanish in the wilderness. Yet a closer examination reveals a far more complex and ritualistic story, one that points directly to a desperate form of communication with the divine. The evidence for ritual sacrifice is written on the bodies themselves, not as random violence, but as a formal, almost liturgical killing. Many of these individuals show signs of what scholars call a triple death, a combination of different methods of execution. A person might have been struck on the head, garroted with a cord, and then had their throat cut, all in a single ceremonial act. This was not overkill in the modern sense, but a deliberate layering of violent methods, perhaps intended to appease different aspects of a god or to ensure the spirit's passage was absolute and binding. The care taken with their placement is another powerful clue. These bodies were not simply dumped. They were often carefully weighted down with stones or wooden stakes, or positioned in a specific posture, sometimes even placed at the precise boundary between two tribal territories. This was a deliberate deposition into the bog, a landscape the Celts viewed as a sacred, liminal space, a gateway between our world and the world of the gods. The final, compelling piece of evidence comes from the calendar. The times of death for many bog bodies, determined through forensic analysis of their stomach contents and the surrounding plant life, align eerily with major Celtic fire festivals like Beltane or Samhain. These were times of immense spiritual significance, moments when the veil between worlds was thought to be thinnest. What if these individuals were chosen offerings given to the gods at these potent moments to ensure a good harvest, to bring victory in war, or to restore balance to the tribe? They may have been volunteers, criminals, or even kings, their sacrifice a profound transaction with powers we can scarcely comprehend, a life given in the cold, dark water to guarantee the continuation of all life on the land. Deep in the arid heart of Arizona, the Superstition Mountains hold a secret that has lured men to their deaths for over a century. This is the legend of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, a tale of unimaginable wealth hidden in a barren landscape. According to the story, a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz discovered a vein of gold so pure he could pluck nuggets from the rock with his bare hands. He guarded the location with his life, giving only cryptic, dying clues that have fueled thousands of fruitless expeditions. But what if this was not just a campfire story, but the ghost of a real historical operation? The theory points to a specific family, the Peraltas from Sonora, Mexico. In the early 1800s, this powerful clan held mining grants from the Spanish crown and were known to conduct extensive prospecting expeditions far to the north. They allegedly discovered incredibly rich gold deposits within the superstitions, establishing a network of mines and hauling out vast quantities of ore using mule trains. Their success, however, was their downfall. The story goes that around the 1840s, a large Peralta mining party was ambushed by Apache warriors who fiercely defended their sacred land. The entire group was supposedly massacred at a place now called the Massacre Grounds, their minds abandoned and their knowledge lost in the violence. This is where Jacob Waltz enters the picture. A prospector who arrived in Arizona decades later, Waltz somehow came into possession of a detailed map said to be drawn on rawhide that was attributed to the Peralta family. He also had gold ore of exceptional quality, which he would use to pay for supplies in Phoenix. The theory suggests that Waltz did not find a new mother lode, but rather rediscovered one of the lost Peralta diggings. He was not the mine's creator, but its final inheritor, a man who stumbled upon a fortune that was already old. The reason the mine has never been found, despite over a century of searching, could be brutally simple geology. The entrance to such a small, ancient workings would not be a grand tunnel, but a simple prospect hole or a narrow crevice. In the tectonically active Superstition Mountains, a single powerful earthquake could have triggered a massive rock slide, burying the entrance under hundreds of tons of rubble and scree. Over the decades, desert winds would have scattered dust and soil, and hardy plants would have taken root, weaving a perfect natural camouflage across the sky. The mine would not be hidden in a remote canyon, but could be lying in plain sight, its telltale opening seamlessly blended into the mountainside, a secret swallowed by the very land that once gave it up. The Lost Dutchman's mine may be less a treasure to be found, and more an archaeological site waiting to be unearthed, its golden veins still running through the rock, silently waiting for the next shift in the earth to reveal what the mountain has chosen to hide. A strange silhouette haunted the skies of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, its arrival heralding a time of deep unease. Throughout 1966 and 67, dozens of ordinary people reported terrifying encounters with a creature they called the Mothman. It was described as a towering, winged humanoid as large as a man, with massive wings and piercing red eyes that seemed to glow with an unearthly light. Its appearance was so unsettling that it became inextricably linked with the catastrophic collapse of the Silver Bridge in December 1967, a tragedy that claimed 46 lives, cementing the Mothman's legend as a paranormal omen of doom. But what if this supernatural entity was not a herald of disaster, but a simple case of mistaken identity, a creature of flesh and feather misperceived in the dim twilight? The most compelling natural explanation points to the sandhill crane, a real and magnificent bird whose characteristics align with the Mothman reports in startling ways. These are not small birds. They stand up to 5 feet tall with an impressive wingspan stretching over 7 feet. When seen in poor light, taking off from a field or marsh, their immense size and powerful wing beats could easily be mistaken for a large, human-like figure struggling to become airborne. The most iconic detail of the Mothman, its glowing red eyes, finds a perfect match in the sandhill crane. These birds possess a bare patch of crimson skin on their foreheads, which can appear to glow or reflect light in the dark, creating the illusion of piercing, unblinking red orbs. The eerie, high-pitched calls of the sandhill crane, echoing across the rural landscape, could have added an auditory layer of strangeness to an already frightening visual experience. Furthermore, the timing of the sightings aligns with the crane's migration patterns, placing them in the region during the very months the Mothman was most frequently seen. The human mind, especially when startled in the dark, is wired to fill in blanks with familiar patterns, a psychological phenomenon called pareidolia. A witness catching a fleeting glimpse of this enormous, unexpected bird, its red head patch gleaming, might have their brain instantly assemble the pieces into something more monstrous, something that fits a primal fear of the unknown. The subsequent bridge disaster then cast a dark, retrospective shadow over these encounters, weaving them into a narrative of supernatural warning. The legend of the Mothman is a powerful story of community trauma and the need to find meaning in tragedy, but its origin may be far more ordinary, a testament to how easily our perceptions can be reshaped by fear and the flight of a very large, very real bird. That unassuming copper sheet from a desert cave holds a list of fortunes, but its story may not have ended in the 1st century. The vast wealth it describes vanished from history, only to reappear centuries later in the hands of the most powerful military order of the Middle Ages. When the Knights Templar arrived in the Holy Land during the Crusades, their official mission was to protect pilgrims. Yet within a remarkably short time, this small band of knights transformed into the wealthiest and most influential financial institution in the Christian world. They amassed a fortune so immense it defied explanation, building a network of castles and cathedrals and essentially inventing international banking. Where did this staggering wealth come from? The official records are silent, but a compelling theory suggests they found it. While garrisoned on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the very ground believed to be the site of Solomon's Temple, the Templars conducted extensive excavations beneath their headquarters. It is entirely plausible that during these digs they unearthed something far more valuable than any battlefield plunder. They could have discovered the copper scroll itself, or perhaps even the physical treasures it so meticulously catalogued. Imagine the scene, a group of knights breaking into a sealed chamber to find not just gold, but the sacred treasure of the Second Temple, the very heart of ancient Jewish faith and wealth. This single discovery would have provided the seed capital for their entire financial empire, a divine windfall that elevated them from simple soldiers to masters of commerce. This theory provides a tangible, historical source for the enduring legends of Templar treasure. It was not just wealth they guarded, but a legacy. When the order was brutally suppressed in the early 1300s, their vast holdings were seized by King Philip of France, yet their main treasury of coin and relics was never found. It had simply vanished. This is where the threads of history intertwine. The treasure from the copper scroll discovered by the Templars had to be hidden once more. This explains the frantic efforts to spirit it away from France, perhaps across the sea to a new world. The sophisticated, booby-trapped money pit on Oak Island, with its clever flood tunnels and deep shafts, bears the hallmark of Templar engineering, a level of skill far beyond that of common pirates. Similarly, the strange occurrences and rumored treasures in the French village of Rennes-le-Château are often linked to the Order's secretive legacy. The Templars were not just hiding gold, they were protecting a secret of biblical proportions, a hoard so significant its origin had to be obscured forever. The copper scroll may have been their map, and the treasure we still hunt for today might be the same one listed 2,000 years ago, a fortune that passed from the hands of ancient priests into the vaults of medieval knights, only to disappear once more into the shadows of history. This delicate balance of ice and wind is a performance that happens only under the most specific conditions. First, the desert floor must receive just enough rainfall to create a temporary, shallow pond, a sheet of water no more than a few inches deep. This is a rare event in one of the driest places on Earth. Then, the temperature must plummet on a clear, cold night, freezing that water into vast, window-pane-thin sheets of ice. The ice cannot be too thick or it would lock the rocks in place, and it cannot be too thin or it would shatter uselessly. It must be the perfect thickness, strong enough to form large, cohesive panels, yet buoyant enough to float on the remaining meltwater. Now comes the final actor, the wind. It cannot be a gale which would tear the ice apart, nor a gentle zephyr which would have no effect at all. It requires a steady, persistent breeze, typically between 5 and 10 miles per hour. When all these elements align, the magic begins. The rising sun softens the ice, causing it to fracture into floating islands that encircle the rocks. The wind pushes against these broad, sail-like panels, and the ice, in turn, grips the embedded stones, shoving them slowly across the soft, slick mud of the playa. The entire process is a silent, slow-motion ballet, with the rocks moving at a glacial pace, sometimes taking several minutes to travel a single inch, carving their elegant, curving paths as they go. It is a fleeting masterpiece of physics, a reminder that the most profound mysteries are often solved not by grand forces, but by the perfect, momentary harmony of simple, natural elements. The vast Pacific Ocean swallowed one of history's most celebrated aviators without a trace. Amelia Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan vanished on July 2, 1937, during the most challenging leg of their around-the-world flight. The official search was called off after a massive, fruitless effort, but one theory has emerged as the most credible, pointing to a tiny, uninhabited speck of land called Gardner Island. This hypothesis suggests that after failing to find their intended fuel stop, Howland Island, and with their Lockheed Electra low on fuel, Earhart managed a desperate, skilled landing on a flat coral reef just off Gardner's shore. The evidence for this castaway scenario is both haunting and compelling. For days after her disappearance, radio operators across the Pacific reported hearing faint, garbled signals on frequencies Earhart was known to use. These were not random static, but deliberate, if weak, calls for help, suggesting a powered aircraft with a live operator, not a wreck at the bottom of the sea. The most tangible clues emerged 3 years later. In 1940, a British colonial officer exploring Nikumaroro, as it is now known, made a startling discovery. He found a partial human skeleton along with the remains of a campfire, a sextant box, and a bottle of a herbal liqueur Earhart was known to carry. The bones were initially examined and measured, with the official report concluding they belonged to a short, stocky male. That conclusion stood for decades, effectively dismissing the connection, but modern forensic science has cast serious doubt on that initial assessment. When researchers reanalyzed the original measurements using contemporary techniques, they found the bone proportions were far more consistent with a woman of European descent of Earhart's height and build. The skeleton, tragically lost during the war, may have been the aviator herself all along. Further expeditions to the island have uncovered a collection of artifacts that paint a vivid picture of a castaway's struggle for survival. They found broken glass that matched the exact type of a Freckle cream jar from the 1930s, a product Amelia was known to use, a woman's compact, a zip from a flight jacket, and even pre-war American cosmetics were scattered near a makeshift campsite. The most poignant discovery was a collection of giant clam shells, all opened in the same way, clustered together as if someone had been systematically harvesting them for food and water. The theory presents a heartbreaking narrative. After a miraculous landing, Earhart and Noonan survived for an unknown period, sending out radio calls from a plane that was slowly being battered by the surf. They would have been stranded on an island with no fresh water source, relying on rain and what little they could salvage. The evidence suggests one, or both, eventually succumbed to injury, thirst, or starvation. Their final story written in scattered artifacts and a skeleton that was found, measured, and then tragically misplaced by history. Gardner Island does not offer a clean ending, but it provides the most convincing collection of clues, turning a legendary disappearance into a tangible human tragedy etched into a remote coral atoll. The deep, peat-stained waters of Loch Ness hold a legend as murky as the lake itself. For generations, the image of a long-necked plesiosaur has captured our imagination, a living dinosaur surviving in a Scottish Highland refuge. Yet this romantic idea collapses under the cold light of biology. To sustain a population over centuries, you would need not just one creature, but a whole breeding colony, dozens of animals requiring a massive food supply to survive. The cold, nutrient-poor loch simply could not support such a large group of air-breathing predators. The plesiosaur theory, while captivating, sinks into the realm of impossible fantasy. But if it is not a prehistoric reptile, what are people seeing? A far more plausible answer slithers just beneath the surface, one that is native to these very waters. The European eel is a known resident of Loch Ness, and its life cycle is a story of epic migration and mysterious growth. These creatures are born in the distant Sargasso Sea, journeying thousands of miles to freshwater lakes and rivers across Europe, including the deep trenches of Loch Ness. While most eels we encounter are modest in size, the species holds a hidden potential for gigantism. In the vast, dark, and food-rich environment of the loch, an eel could live for decades, growing to an exceptional length. There are documented cases of these eels reaching 6, even 8 feet long, and in the perfect conditions of a deep, isolated lake, who is to say they could not grow even larger. Imagine a creature of such proportions, its thick, muscular body undulating through the gloomy water. Its sinuous, serpentine movement would create a series of humps breaking the surface, its long, dark form easily mistaken for the neck and body of a monster. A solitary, monstrous eel, perhaps one in a generation that achieves such immense size, would explain the sporadic and often blurry sightings that have fueled the legend for a century. The true monster of Loch Ness may not be a relic from the age of dinosaurs, but a resident of the deep we have always known, its ordinary biology magnified by the dark water and our own yearning for mystery. That same subtle current capable of plating gold might have served a far more personal purpose, reaching into the very body to soothe its aches. While the Baghdad battery could have been a tool for artisans, another theory suggests it was an instrument for healers, a source of early electrotherapy. The ancient world was already familiar with the medicinal power of electricity, though they did not call it by that name. Greek and Roman physicians, including the famed Scribonius Largus, documented the use of the torpedo fish, a type of electric ray. Patients suffering from gout or chronic headaches were instructed to stand on the wet sand where these fish lived, receiving a series of mild shocks to their feet. The jolt was known to numb pain and even cause muscles to contract, providing a form of relief that must have seemed miraculous, but relying on a living creature was unpredictable. What if a healer could harness that same power in a controlled, reliable way? A device like the Baghdad battery, generating a consistent 1 volt of electricity, would have been a revolutionary tool. A physician could have attached copper wires to the jar's terminals and applied them directly to a patient's skin over a painful joint or a tense muscle. The resulting tingling sensation, a gentle flow of electrons, could have provided a localized numbing effect, distracting the nervous system from deeper pain. For someone suffering from arthritis, this might have offered precious moments of comfort. For a person with a muscle spasm, the low-level current could have encouraged the cramped tissue to relax and release. This was not a cure, but a form of management, a way to use the fundamental forces of nature to bring the body back into balance. It transforms the simple clay jar from a chemical curiosity into a potential instrument of compassion. A quiet technology for easing human suffering long before the concept of volts and amps was ever formally understood. But the secret of the Iron Mask might not be a story of twins, but of a love affair that crossed a sea. Another compelling theory paints the prisoner not as a royal sibling, but as a dangerous byproduct of a queen's passion. This idea claims the man was the illegitimate son of Queen Anne of Austria and her charismatic English lover, the Duke of Buckingham. Their relationship was the stuff of European legend, a politically explosive romance that nearly upended the alliance between France and England. If a child resulted from this union, his very existence would have been a ticking time bomb. He would have carried the blood of both the French Queen and an English Duke, a living, breathing testament to a scandal that could have toppled the French monarchy. For King Louis XIV, this man would not have been a competing heir, but a different kind of threat entirely. He was a walking challenge to the legitimacy of his own mother's virtue, and by extension, the sanctity of the royal line itself. His face alone could have sparked dangerous questions, perhaps bearing a resemblance to his English father or even to the Queen herself. The mask in this scenario was not to hide a face identical to the king's, but to conceal a face that told a story the king needed erased. This theory finds a potential name in the historical record, a valet named Eustache Dorger. Arrested under a cloud of extreme secrecy, Dorger was involved in the infamous affair of the poisons, a sprawling scandal that implicated members of the highest French aristocracy in black magic and murder. What if Dorger was not merely a servant but the secret son, a man whose knowledge and bloodline made him too dangerous to ever be free? his imprisonment for over 3 decades would have been a permanent solution to a political problem, a life sentence for the crime of being born. So, was the man in the iron mask a hidden brother or a secret son? The mask itself offers no answer, serving only to remind us that the greatest secrets of power are often those locked away not in vaults, but in the silent, living flesh of those who carry them. The sheer force of the Tunguska explosion demands an equally extraordinary cause, and science has not been shy in offering possibilities that border on science fiction. One of the most radical theories suggests that the devastation was not caused by an asteroid or comet, but by a microscopic black hole passing straight through our planet. Imagine an object no larger than a single atom, yet containing the mass of a small mountain. According to this idea, such a primordial black hole, a relic from the universe's birth, could have slammed into the Earth near Tunguska. It would have punched cleanly through the atmosphere and crust, exiting out the other side in the North Atlantic Ocean. The immense energy released as it tore through the rock and air would have mimicked a massive aerial explosion, perfectly explaining the lack of an impact crater and any large meteorite fragments. The exit event, a similar outburst over the ocean, would have gone entirely unnoticed in 1908. Yet for all its elegant drama, this theory suffers from a critical lack of proof. A black hole transiting the Earth would have left a very specific seismic signature, a double set of shock waves from both its entry and its exit, and no such paired signal was recorded by the seismographs of the era. Furthermore, we would expect to see ongoing geological effects along its path through the mantle and core, disturbances that have never been detected. Another equally speculative idea points to a fragment of antimatter. In the depths of space, a piece of antimatter, a mirror of normal matter, could have been wandering for eons. Upon hitting our atmosphere, it would have undergone immediate and total annihilation upon contact with ordinary air molecules. This matter-antimatter reaction converts 100% of mass into energy, a process far more efficient than nuclear fission, and could have produced the blinding flash and shockwave with no solid debris left behind. It is a clean, terrifyingly simple explanation, but antimatter of such a scale is not thought to exist naturally in concentrated chunks within our galaxy. It is typically created in subatomic pairs that instantly destroy each other. There is no known mechanism to create and preserve a basketball-sized piece of antimatter, and no residual radioactive isotopes were found at the site that would serve as the smoking gun for such an event. These theories stretch the boundaries of physics to their limits, offering cosmic solutions to an earthly mystery. They remind us that the universe is stranger than we can suppose, but they remain on the fringe because the evidence simply is not there. The truth of Tunguska likely lies in a more conventional, if still spectacular, cosmic accident, leaving the black holes and antimatter to fuel our imagination of what might have been. But what if the darkness in the tower held a secret more hopeful than any grave? The theory that the princes survived offers a different kind of mystery, one not of bodies hidden but of lives preserved. It suggests that their uncle, Richard III, despite seizing the crown, was not a monster who would order the deaths of children. Perhaps the boys were simply too dangerous to keep in England, their very existence a rallying point for rebellion, but too closely related to kill. In this version of events, loyal supporters, moved by pity or political cunning, arranged a secret escape. Under the cover of night, the two boys could have been smuggled down the Thames, disguised as commoners, and placed aboard a ship bound for the European continent. Their new lives would have been ones of quiet anonymity, their royal blood a dangerous secret they had to bury forever. This would explain the complete absence of their remains and the persistent, unsettling rumors that circulated for years. The most tantalizing evidence for this comes not from England, but from the pretenders who later challenged the Tudor king, Henry VII. A young man named Lambert Simnel initially claimed to be the younger prince, Edward, and then later the Earl of Warwick. While his rebellion was crushed, a far more convincing figure soon emerged, Perkin Warbeck. For years, Warbeck claimed to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the two princes. He was so persuasive that he gained the recognition and financial backing of several European courts, including those of France and Burgundy. He knew intimate details of the English court and the tower's layout, details a common impostor from Flanders would have struggled to learn. Warbeck led actual invasions of England, his cause taken seriously enough to threaten the throne. He was ultimately captured and, after being paraded through London, confessed to being an impostor before being executed. But his confession was extracted under duress, likely through torture, making it entirely unreliable. What if his original story was the truth? What if Perkin Warbeck was exactly who he said he was, the last surviving son of a king, forced in the end to deny his own identity to save his family from further persecution? It is a fragile hope built on the silence of the grave and the words of a man broken by the executioner. Yet it persists, a quiet alternative to a bloody ending, suggesting that sometimes the greatest historical secrets are not of death, but of a life successfully hidden. Our journey through 50 wild theories reaches its end, but the questions they raise linger in the air like a haunting echo. From lost continents and ancient astronauts to cursed relics and hidden tombs, we have ventured into a world where the line between established fact and captivating speculation is beautifully blurred. These are not just fanciful stories, but ideas born from a sliver of evidence, a strange artifact, or a historical inconsistency that refuses to be ignored. They speak to a fundamental human drive, a deep-seated need to look at the official story and ask, but what if? We are drawn to these enigmas because they challenge our understanding of the past, reminding us that history is not a dusty collection of settled facts, but a dynamic, living narrative. It is a puzzle with missing pieces, and the search for them is what keeps the story alive and endlessly fascinating. History is not a closed book, but a living story still being written. Which of these theories do you think has the best chance of being proven true? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more journeys into the